So to participate in the second survey, you have to enter a mobile application and select session 1. And we proceed with question number 1. What are the key enablers for strengthening mining industry in Southeast Europe? And the answers: introducing best practice mining legislation, aligning lateral laws with the mining law, effective state administration ministries that apply the legislation, strong political support from government, social license to operate. And you are welcome to choose your answer and then scroll down the page and push question list button to get to question number 2. The second question: what can investors do to empower and assist governments in developing mining? And the answers are: take officials to see well-run mines with their eyes, organize and invite officials to mining conferences, seminars, lectures, establish a strong national mining association which engages the government, assist government in drafting mining law and other laws, support government in establishing a one-stop shop for mining, teach officials economics of mining and benefits for economy, appeal to the patriotism to reduce resource import dependency. And after answering, also scroll down and choose question list to move to the question number 3. And the third question is: what is your best advice to governments? Make your country stronger by supporting... Sorry? It has switched off. Thank you. Make your country stronger by supporting sustainable private-owned mining. Make your country stronger by supporting state-owned mining. Do not allow international companies to exploit your natural resources. Do allow international companies to mine your natural resources.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. So we got a bit of some technical hiccup. That's fine. So let's move on to session number 1 of the day. So it will be moderated by Dr. Milan Parivodic, advocate or lawyer or partner of Parivodic Advocati, and one speaker substitutes. So we had Alex Bivakwa. He was originally planning to speak, but he had an emergency business trip to Egypt. The company, I believe, is just on the verge of winning a contract with Egypt. So I'm glad to welcome here Patrick Barnes, who gladly stepped in and traveled from London at a very short notice. So Milan, over to you. And after this session, we'll have a lunch, and the lunch will be served downstairs in the room actually which we advertised, and my colleagues actually will be pointing you in the right direction. Thank you.
Arthur, thank you very much. I really congratulate you and your team on all the wonderful work that you have done internationally for mining for years back. And these conferences are really getting more and more exciting from year to year. So really well done, and keep up the excellent work, you and your entire team. Congratulations. We have a panel which is devoted actually to government relations and the attitudes of government towards mining, and how can the governments improve mining industry in their countries, and how can they foster it through positive government action, through better laws, through better implementation of the laws, through developing policies which are not xenophobic, which are open to international investment. So this is the topic, and the questions that you just answered to actually relate to the dilemmas which governments usually have in this respect. And I kindly invite Mr. Patrick Barnes, Head of Metals and Mining Consulting, EMUAC of Wood Mackenzie, to make his first presentation. Please, Patrick.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. I will tell Alex that half of you got up and left when you saw that he wasn't here, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to know that, that he was missed. But in all seriousness, it's an honor to be here to talk about mining. Mining has enormous potential, not because it's fun or because it's a cool thing to do, but because of what it has the potential to do for a country. When you talk about a natural resource, it really is that. It's a resource that can be used to accomplish what countries need. So, so jumping right into it again, I do want to move quickly through a few slides about Wood Mackenzie. Wood Mackenzie covers, you may be familiar with us for our price forecasts. We do cover all the natural resources, industry, and energy value streams, supply, demand, risk, also commercial and strategic insights, with a focus on analytics. And our product offerings on the consulting side, which is where I work, are focused around 6 core areas: business environment, transaction support, commercial advisory, strategy, business improvement, and what we're going to talk about today, which is public sector and government advisory. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second here and talk about what I mean by government advisory, because I think that the number one mistake that a lot of companies make in dealing with governments is they fail to understand how hard a minister's job is. And what I've got here, I've listed them as our offerings to governments, but really this could be considered a list of the key roles of a public authority for mining, the things that they have to get right. And it is a massive list, and it is extremely difficult to do well. But I also think it's worth mentioning because many of you in the room are with private companies, and we also help private companies tackle these topics, because almost all of these are places where the government and private sector are actually interacting and have an interface. I won't go into the details. You guys do have access to this presentation online, but in terms of strategy, there's a number of areas within that in terms of diagnosing and understanding things well, to getting the licensing and concession granting process right. How do you manage the investment side of it in terms of, what stake does the government get? What take do the investors get? How do you promote that and create the right conditions to attract investment? Fiscal advisory obviously factors in as a follow-on to that. You have to get the fiscal design right to get it right over the long term. And then governance is the part that's often easy to neglect, even for a government, which you think that's their core job, but at the end of the day, they have budgetary restrictions and the need to show results as well, and the same kind of short-term focus that affects companies can also affect governments when they're trying to deal with political cycles. So if we move on here, I'll give you just a couple of very quick examples. I won't read all of them, but we've worked recently, I've highlighted some in Africa, the Middle East, and South America, and North America as well. More of the areas that I've worked before moving to London in the last few months. But we've worked around the globe on helping governments do a couple of things. As I mentioned, they have an enormous amount of things to do, and the hard thing is in a limited budget environment with a limited bandwidth and usually without a lot of highly trained people, governments have to be extremely focused on the things that will move the dial. I apologize to my translators, that's an idiom, but things that will actually make significant impact. They have to be very entrepreneurial. You might not think of a government as an entrepreneurial setting, but they really have to be. They have to do more than their resources allow them to do, and they have to overcome a lot of constraints by being very efficient. I personally lived in Ecuador for a number of years, and we were able to work with them specifically to take a country that had been off the mining map for most of 10 years, and within 3 years turn them into an award-winning mining jurisdiction that was attracting more than 10 times the amount of mining investment that they were at the beginning of our work. So talking a little bit more specifically about the timing, we do think that now is the right time for policy reform. We all know that this is a cyclical industry and waves come, and it's now is the right time. We do think the outlook is positive. For most commodities, we're looking at a recovery upcycle, and that means that governments and companies need to be prepared now so they can surf that wave when it comes. Investors are also noticing this. You can see this in the amount of investment, venture capital that's being attracted in the TSXV, and you can see that after bottoming out in the about 5 year ago time frame, we're seeing a significant positive trend in the amount of exploration dollars with a heavy emphasis on copper and gold as usual. And also an extra focus on brownfield investment after investors got a bit more burned with greenfield investments in the previous cycle. But in terms of why, I mentioned it's a resource that can be unlocked. But what is it that you're actually unlocking? Because mining has the potential to contribute to every aspect of development, however you want to measure it in a country, and whatever the country's development, its location on the development pathway is. On the left hand here, you can see a number of ways, just at a high level, that mining really has a way to impact GDP, comes up often, state income, attracting foreign investment, that helps with balance of payments and supporting currencies, industrial diversification, industrialization in general, improvement of jobs and wages. Those are all major contributions, and on the right, those are enabled by a number of factors, some of which governments control and some of which they don't. So geological potential, you either have the right commodities or you don't. The price environment is not controlled by most countries. You could argue that China sometimes has been able to exert some influence, but most don't. And as you move down towards fiscal regime and regulatory and institutional framework, you can see governments have an enormous amount of control over that piece, since that's where we see a lot of their activity. That's manifest. This is just an Africa and Middle East example, but there's been a flurry of new mining codes and reforms as governments have started to compete for this investment, and they've realized what they can go after and the stakes. Now, not all these reforms have worked out totally successfully, and the downside to this is if it's not done well, these changes, even if they're well motivated, can often lead to more perceived instability by investors. So it's important to focus on what you can impact and to do it right in the first place. And the returns can be really quite large if they do it. So what is it that companies and countries tend to get wrong? It's the way that they look at the overlap between what each party needs. In terms of the government, they often fail to take into account or tailor their policies for the actual needs and idiosyncrasies of the mining sector. They put together policies that are either borrowed from an oil and gas sector if it's well developed. That's what we saw a lot in Ecuador and in Egypt as well. Or sometimes they're trying to borrow from other industrial sectors. You're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, to use another American idiom. So the challenge is to actually align the fact that mining cycles are unique. You have high exploration risks, extremely high risk, high capital intensity, and that results in very long payback time frames and enormous social visibility. When you look at that, that is not a very congruent model with a political cycle. Political cycles in most countries are 4 or 5 years, and governments are under enormous pressure to demonstrate some real results in that time frame, and if it can't be measured during that time period, it's difficult to get the support to get it done. And that's one of the main reasons why mining has struggled to take off in many of these jurisdictions, is ministers just look at it and say, huge effort, huge headaches on the right-hand side, I'm not going to see the payoff, maybe my successor or his successor are going to see the results. And that's difficult calculus, it's difficult to ask a minister to make that kind of a move. So how can you actually do that, right? So how do you help them know what can I get done in the right amount of time? And it's where analytics really comes in. So moving on to analytics, I'll give you one example. Again, I speak more to the Ecuador case study because that's where I spent much of the last 4 years of my life. Very quick picture of what Ecuador had. They had a very, very good, at the top left you can see they had an excellent position on the cost curve for gold. One of the cheapest places, high grades, very good deposits, and yet they had virtually no production value you can see on the right. This is a curve of total mine production value, and you see in a bunch of these developing economies, they were far to the right with very little actual production value in mining. The reason for that was companies just couldn't get the IRRs they needed despite low costs because the tax burden was too high. Now, the government didn't need us to tell them that. Investors had been very, very clear about that for years. So how do you go about actually solving that problem? You have to be a little bit more scientific about it. This is where the analytics comes in. So if you look at the way this, on the left-hand curve here, we're showing two things. The x-axis shows you the fiscal burden. So this is effectively government take. There's a lot of different ways to measure government take. That's a topic for another day. But this is actually showing as a percentage of total revenue, the pieces of the total pie, not percentage of profits. And on the vertical axis, you see the amount of actual fiscal revenue. There are other things you can measure for, or these other benefits, right? You can optimize for whatever you want as a government. But in terms of attracting the most fiscal revenue, you can see that there's a kind of a classic Laffer curve where you get, as the fiscal burden goes up, the light blue line comes in and you get fewer and fewer projects developed because it's more expensive. But government revenue goes up and up and up until you hit a sweet spot, and then it starts to be prohibitively expensive, and government take starts coming down again. Ecuador found itself very far to the right, despite all of its great potential, and so we had to find the right way to help bring them back into the sweet spot. And what governments often face is a problem where they say, hey, I know it needs to be lower, but how low is too low, and how do I actually defend myself when I'm giving value back to companies? Right? That's a very difficult position for a minister to be in. So let's see how much time I've got. I'm coming up against the last of my time here, but if I had to just leave you with a few closing points, it's that in all these things, and I'm just showing one example on the fiscal side, but it's always a spectrum of how open you can be. And that it takes a huge effort for governments to do this, and the stakes of getting it wrong are huge because you can do a lot of damage that's very hard to recover from. Going too far to the right, obviously you don't get any results, and too far to the left, and it's a recipe that is basically 100% chance that at some point in the future you're going to have a different administration come in, feel like things are unfair, and you're going to have a recipe for instability. So getting that number right is essential. Let's see here. So finishing up. Let's see. In conclusion, I think, as we mentioned, the opportunity is a kind of a classic SWOT analysis for a generic country and a company situation. The opportunity at the top, the opportunity is huge. There's a growing demand cycle, recovery of prices. Many of these countries have enormous resources that they could leverage. The threats are real in terms of other countries competing for them. Social threats should also be included there. So countries really need a lot of help in getting the right strengths that they have leveraged. How do you leverage and unlock that geological potential? Bring on the labor, skilled labor that you have, or cost-efficient labor and transport. How do you take advantage of those things and address those weaknesses? Because the reality is that governance is a very difficult job. And as a result, there's always a lot more that can be done by countries and companies to move towards a sustainable industry. And in closing, it's a rapidly changing world. Those companies and countries who are able to understand the environment in which they're operating, understand the ways to move towards a shared space that works for everyone, and adapt to that environment using an intelligent approach will thrive. And it takes an informed strategy. Neither companies nor governments have infinite funds, so you have to be very entrepreneurial and very focused. But when done with the right kind of analytics and the right support, you come up with answers that can be defended to investors, that can be defended to the local population, to other politicians, and you can start to build actual public policy at the level of a government that is really conducive to mining development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick, for this very interesting presentation. And it is my pleasure to call to the floor Mrs. Kaisa Turunen, Scientific Coordinator, Research Scientist of the Geological Survey of Finland, to talk about the greater cooperation between mining and metallurgy regions within the EU and the very fascinating initiative actually that you have of making this network within the European regions. Please.
Thank you. Sorry for the wrong event name, but it changed since last week of OECD event. So I'm Kaisa Turunen from Geological Survey of Finland, and I'm also the scientific coordinator of the MIRU project. So what do we do in MIRU projects? We are a Horizon 2020 project that started in 2017 and it ends next year. And we have 30 partners from 13 European countries and one from Chile. And what's the aim of the MIRU is trying to cooperate, or that the regions, mining and metallurgy regions, would cooperate more than they are at the moment. And another aim is to enhance mining and metallurgy within Europe. And as you can see, especially the eastern part of Europe is still quite white. And because we are a cooperative and support action project, we welcome more regions to join the network. And a little bit about the background. As we already heard, that there's a decline in the social acceptance of mining within Europe, but also globally. And we are still relying a lot, especially on the critical raw materials in Europe. And our contribution to the overall raw material supply is only around 9%, including the industrial minerals. And there's general lack of the importance in our everyday life of the raw materials. And there has been quite big socioeconomic changes in mining and metallurgy regions, not only in Europe, but globally. And the regions are losing their economic power and inhabitants. And because mining is happening inside the region, it's local phenomena, they are also kind of like gaining from the mining, but also facing the difficulties and problems. But still, the regions actually realize that they really need mining, not only for their own regional development, but also for the EU. And also the social acceptance is highest at local or regional level. And what we are doing, we are doing a lot of SWOT analysis. We are gathering more information about what are the hampering or enhancing things inside regions that they could gain more mining and metallurgy. We are also enhancing the cooperation between these different regions, because now they are not really cooperating enough. We are seeking synergies between the regional development funding and also the different kind of mineral strategies and policies, and things such as smart specialization. And we just started up maybe 1 year ago cooperation with similar project of OECD, which is Mining Cities and Regions. And we think that Europe should also cooperate not only within the Europe, but also the region should cooperate globally. And this way we can benefit from OECD and they can benefit from us. Our data, our research that we do in MIRU or inside the regions benefit also OECD, because many of their regions are European regions. And this way we can also increase the visibility of European mining. Here are some of our regions at the moment, and as I said, we are lacking the Eastern Europe regions in our network. So if there's some European regions, come talk to me, know more about the MIRU. We still have money for the regions. And we already heard something about the social license, that there's no mining without the social license to operate. But most of the disputes are relatively short-lived in Europe, and the focus, especially in media, is only these few occasions that there's a lot of opposition. And disputes are likely resulting from the environmental disasters or lack of confidence of government and regulatory implementations. but the SLO is needed, as we heard in the morning. Industry needs the public acceptance, and industry needs to create positive value for the local stakeholders and shareholders, of course, as well. And the trend of empowerment communities will continue, and industry really needs to adapt to it. And there's tension between jobs, economic growth, and environmental and social values, and there needs to be more balance. What we are doing in Miro is we are trying to establish a European model of SLO, and we found that there is kind of like a national level and local level, and then the public awareness of the raw materials is kind of like the bridge between these two SLOs. And the national level is related to the responsibility of government, and whereas the local level is kind of related to the local communities who are interested of the mining and are also affected mostly by the projects. And there are already few examples around the globe, but especially in Canada and in Europe, that how to achieve the SLO. It's quite relatively new mechanism in Canada where the communities can write down how they want to be approached by the industry and what their needs and expectations are for the projects. Then in Europe, there are these impact and benefit agreements, which always includes governments. And it clarifies a lot for the stakeholder roles. And again, in Canada, there are some different kind of tax mechanisms that also the company benefits from them. If they are doing good job, they got also tax benefits back. Then there's the government funding of public engagement, where the government helps, especially the small junior companies, for funding the public engagement activities. And at the moment, Miro is only a project, but our biggest aim is to have this network going also after the project, so it will be a permanent regional network and raw materials focused working group, and it will be then be running by the ERIN, European Regions Research and Innovation Network. And it will provide a forum still after the project for sustained interaction between these different regions, but also globally. And if you want to know more about Miro, you can of course contact me, but there are also Miro websites, Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. This is a really interesting initiative, and I'm sure that there will be regions here who could apply also in Southern Europe to your program. Now it is my really distinct pleasure to invite to the podium Mr. Hubert André Dumont, an old friend of mine, one of the finest mining lawyers in Europe, I would say. And I'm sure that Hubert will have many very important thoughts about developing the legal framework for mining in Europe in general. So Hubert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Milan. I'm going to raise some of the challenges that we face in mine permitting as it regards legislation. I'm only dealing with non-energy extractive industries, non-quarries and non-water. The idea is to concentrate on the essential of the mining permitting and leaving each area within its competence and avoid confusion. At mine permitting level, some regulations do tend to go beyond what is precisely permitting. They tend to especially confuse with environment. And this renders the exercise time-consuming and expensive. And so the idea is to have a permit that deals with the title, just the title, the right to actually operate the mine, knowing that other permits will be necessary. And the idea is to fix the mining rights first. Why? It's because mining operators need to be sure that they will be able to actually mine where they want, and this will allow them to go to their investors, shareholders, to the bankers and other lenders, and get funding to finance the rest of the stages, i.e. getting an environmental permit and other permits necessary to operate the mine to actually start the works. In terms of jargon, I'm using research rather than exploration, and exploitation rather than mining, because mining is very generic, and in French, exploitation is more descriptive of the actual operation, and research is also more descriptive rather than exploration, which is too general. So for the rest of my speech, I will use research and exploitation. And so there is no real added value for the country in confusing between mine permitting and other permitting needs. And some countries also do a sort of micromanagement, requesting plans of details, detailed design by the meter, to be able to scrutinize all the details of the project before granting the permit. This is totally useless, very expensive for the mining operators. It may have a reason in certain countries, probably mainly the former communist countries, because at the time the mines were operated with money from the government, with money from the country, with money from the population. And the regulator had to go into the details to make sure the money was well spent. Today it's an investor's issue, it's a lender's issue. The shareholders and the management should be able to appreciate the detailed design, and the regulator should concentrate on the generality. As you will see from this slide, the regulations involved with mining is enormous. The exercise was made by MINEX, who issued a report in 2017, which was and is often cited by the EU Raw Materials Initiative. And it's not really dramatic. You see there are lots of legislations involved. What is annoying is that the where is the pointer? Yes, no, never mind. Yes, the gray columns relate to actual mining law. The others relate to nature conservation, water protection, etc. And some legislations are very wide. So for instance, in Croatia, you will see that 110 different regulations are involved. But what MINEX did is analyze all the legislations, but some legislations may be very topical, so this is probably the reason why we have 110 different regulations in Croatia and only 25 in Portugal, but probably they cover the same topics. But it gives an idea of all regulations, all rules you have to comply with to operate a mine. When we select a number of countries from north to south and east to west, in terms of number of main permits to operate a mine, we see a variety going from 1 to 7. So there is probably something to do to and pose the question, why one permit in one country and why 7 in another country? And in terms of time frame, it goes from 1 month for a research permit to more than 3 years or forever, in fact, to get an exploitation permit. This is also posing questions on how an operator can actually operate a mine, especially in neighboring countries. In one country, he could get the permit in a few months, and in another country for the same deposit, the mining operator will never get its permit. Some countries, when we put the slides side by side, seem to be relatively mining friendly, but these are false friends. For instance, France, you need only 2 permits, but it takes 1.5 to 2 years to get a research permit and 3 years to get an exploitation permit. But in fact, according to I'm from Belgium, not from France, my French colleagues, it has become virtually impossible to mine in France because you will never get the permit. In Croatia, where you have 110 regulations to comply with and 7 permits to get, it may take up to 4.5 years to get the permit. The best in class is Portugal. You need 1 permit for research, 2 to 3 for exploitation, and in 1 month you get your research permit, and in 2 to 3 months you get your exploitation permit. But of course, it's not sufficient. You will need other permits. And when I asked beyond the MINEX report, I asked my colleagues, some of my colleagues in mining-friendly countries such as Sweden, Portugal, and Finland, to give me their opinion on how to get a mining permit in their countries. And you will see that there is still quite a diversity. Sweden is a mining-friendly country, but it could take up to 31 months to get your permit, your exploitation permit. In Finland, you need an environmental impact assessment as well as Sweden, but in Finland is reduced for Natura 2000 areas. In Wallonia, which is the French-speaking part of Belgium, there are still deposits there in metal mining. The pre-draft code of the underground, which is very ambitious but was drawn after a severe report, goes the wrong direction. There you need an environmental impact assessment already at the stage of requesting the permit for research. You have a public inquiry and you have a public tender, also for the research permit. We can understand that a public tender is interesting for a known deposit, but for a green area, mining operators, of course, want discretion. They don't want to tell their competitor that they're interested in a certain area. So silence is the rule. And the first to file rule that applies in the 3 other countries is, of course, the best possible solution. But on the line below, you will see that all these countries, of course, have additional permits to comply with. A building permit, a health and safety permit, explosives, chemicals, environment, of course, you need them all. So the idea, again, is to have to simplify the situation to get a mine permit and go to the rest of the exercise thereafter. In Serbia, and thank you, Milan, for your assistance, Serbia is a candidate member state to the European Union. Serbia modified its mining law in 2015, and as it regards permitting, the time frame is much shorter than it was before. And you get also a first-to-file rule when you apply, and priority, which was not the case before, when you want to convert your research permit to exploitation permit. So a certain progress has been made. So how can we improve this? Well, as I said, and I'm sorry I'm sometimes repeating myself, but as Sir Winston Churchill said, if you want something passed, you have to mention it several times in different ways. So specialize, avoid overlaps. Of course, there can be exceptions for typical features, so already maybe an environmental assessment can be required for certain sensible zones, such as Natura 2000 at the level of the research permit. Avoid interferences with other regulations, each his own business, and unify. Why not unify? Why not create a uniform code in the form of a directive or a regulation, and revise the procedure to simplify them? Is this a crazy idea? What do you think? When I mentioned it first 2 years ago at the World Association of Mining Lawyers, I think people were posing questions, asking whether I had become a bit strange in my thoughts. Well, there are precedents. And I will show you the precedents. You know what the UMOA is, the ECOWAS, or the CEDEAO? These are economic and monetary unions situated between the Sahara and the equator. And in fact, we already have an existing mining code in the UMOA, which is the Economic and Monetary Union of the West of Africa, which gathers countries as Benin, Burkina Faso, a good mining venue, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And they adopted there a mining code in 2003. The CEMAC is the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa, which gathers Gabon, Cameroon, Congo-Brazzaville, not Congo-Kinshasa, not the DRC, Central Africa, Chad, and Guinea Equatorial. There they started drafting a mining code with the assistance of the German corporation and are busy finalizing a draft. I didn't hear any recent news, but in the fall of 2018 they announced that it was progressing. And then the ECOWAS is the Economic Community of the West of Africa, which gather the same countries as the UMOA, plus English-speaking countries such as Nigeria, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and some other countries. In 2009 there, already, they issued a common directive to draft, enhance a common mining policy, and started thinking of a common mining code, which they did. And last week I gathered the news that they were finalizing the text, which had to be taken over by the ministers of mining and foreign affairs and finances of the member states, and that thereafter would be adopted by the member states. So the idea has been implemented before, and the purpose in Africa, of course, is more enhancing local development for these countries that need a lot of development. The trend has evolved and is now taking into account human rights, environment, more than before. So, to go to the EU, yes, we can do it. We can do that. And we can also have a policy by making an inventory of the resources, like the EU initiative on raw materials is doing, and creating an index of the mining permits, licenses or concessions, how you name them. But of course, referring to separate legislation and regulations for other items, such as occupation of land or things like that, tax advantages and other similar things. For tax advantages, I want to raise one issue. As for other incentives, in the EU, these can be considered by the EU Commission as state aid. So we have to watch it very carefully. So that is, in a few slides, the idea of creating an harmonized mining code to facilitate the mining operators and the countries to develop their mining resources, and so address the topics that are very hot topics today, is relaunching our own mining industry and production and secure the supply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hubert, very much. This was a fantastic comparative analysis. And now it is my pleasure to call to the floor Mr. Johannes Drielsma, Deputy Director of Euromines, to talk about a very actual topic, the implementation of EU environmental legislation and challenges in Bulgaria. So, most welcome, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Milan, and thank you to the previous. It's already a very interesting session. I'll have to exercise some discipline to stick to my slides. I'm going to talk about a very specific aspect of governance of mining, and while I focus somewhat on Bulgaria because that's where I'm hosted today, it's an activity that's taking place across the Union. First, a little introduction to myself and to Euromines. Euromines is the European Mining Association. We represent mining companies that are operating here in Europe. The Bulgarian Chamber of Mining and Geology is a member of Euromines. We are the recognized representative of the sector towards the European institutions, like the European Commission. We provide our members with updates on EU policy and an opportunity to network and to have dialogue with the institutions. We tend to carry some key messages around wherever we go, and there are three. We strongly believe that Europe has viable mineral resources. I think you've seen that for Bulgaria today. It's where I would challenge perhaps Patrick on the panel, where it's a tricky thing to decide whether a region is rich in resources or not, because it's very much dependent on how much effort and investment you are prepared to make in exploring. But we think we have good potential in Europe. We're also aware that the demand for raw materials is continuously increasing. I think everyone on this panel agrees to that. And we pride ourselves in operating to the standards that are set here in Europe. And we expect and hope that our regulators will keep us to those standards, but that those standards are such that mining is possible, that sustainable mining can take place in Europe. So, the previous speaker mentioned an EU-funded project called MINEX. I'm going to open by mentioning one called MinGuide. It was similar in many ways. It was bringing together a lot of data from around the Union to try to understand just how rich in resources are we, but also to look at governance issues across the different member states. And it's quite a lengthy report detailing the governance situation in each of the member states, but I wanted to highlight in particular, yeah, I'm having trouble too finding the pointer. One point that I thought was very interesting, that the study concluded that governance goes beyond formal planning and permitting. And I think that's an important finding for us to take back to the European Commission. So whilst the permitting issues raised by my colleague just earlier are of course very important and they need to be focused and efficient, you know, governance of mining, social acceptance of mining, if you like, goes far beyond. And certainly my favorite answer to the first question in the survey today was, we need political commitment. That's how you will encourage mining in your country. If you have political commitment, then the planning and the permitting will just be two essential cogs in the whole machine. It means if you have political commitment, the capacity of your institutions will be improved because you'll be committed to making sure that the authorities are able to do the very difficult job that Mr. Barnes described for us earlier. Now, one of the hot topics today, of course, is circular economy. I'm glad to say that I think this is the second or third picture of the circular economy you've seen today. and all of them have included exploration. That's a marvelous achievement. We need to continuously remind our decision makers that there's no circular economy without minerals exploration. And the European Commission has recently tried to elucidate for regulators, but also for the general public, how our industry, the mining industry, is and will continue to contribute to the circular economy. So this is new guidance that was published, I believe, February this year. And it's pointing out how an existing directive from 2008, the Extractive Waste Directive, requires certain things that will contribute to a circular economy. And for many of us here in the room, it looks a little bit like Mining 101. These are things that, of course, a mining engineer will always have in the forefront of his or her mind. But it's very important that we point out to people how this goes hand in glove with efficient use of resources, efficient valorization of resources, and maintaining the value of those resources once they are delivered to the economy. Now, the very specific topic I bring to you today is implementation of that directive. I'm sorry, I said 2008. It was published in 2006. There have been a number of reporting rounds since 2006 where member states have explained to the EU institutions how they've gone about implementing this directive. And I'm sad to say that the picture has not been a very clear one for the European Commission. So the EU has difficulty actually to evaluate whether this directive has been implemented. The data that has been reported to them seems inconsistent, at least to their uninitiated eye. We, as Patrick has mentioned, we cannot take for granted that all of the responsible officials in our institutions will understand 100% the sector that they're regulating. And the EU finds itself now still needing more plausible information on the amounts of mine waste that are generated by our industry in each of the states and how each of those quantities of waste is being managed. So, for example, I must start by saying that Bulgaria actually comes out near the top of the class in terms of how complete the reporting is. And we know that it's a very important mining country in Europe. But even in Bulgaria, there are some strange idiosyncrasies in the reported statistics. So Bulgaria has reported a large amount of hazardous waste coming from the mining sector, so large, in fact, that it represents 93% of that category of waste over the whole of the EU. And the EU quite rightly questions that and say, well, Bulgaria is a large mining country, but we have similar quantities of extraction happening in countries like Sweden and Finland, and so we need to understand the differences in the reporting there. Also, there are only 4 Category A facilities declared in Bulgaria. Category A are the higher risk facilities that, for which all of the elements of the directive must be applied. Now, there could be a very plausible explanation. There could be that indeed the majority of the waste that is generated in the mining sector happens at 3 or 4 mines in Bulgaria. That could be, but it needs to be explained to the Commission. Also, when the consultants working for the Commission have looked into the national legislation, they see a definition there of extractive waste that appears to include things that we would say are not necessarily mining waste, things like slag from smelters, or cinder or ash from power stations. These would be things that we would normally expect would fall into a separate category of waste, not in the extractive waste. Bulgaria has reported that there are absolutely no waste facilities containing a category of waste that's called inert waste. That causes some head scratching. And then the EU apparently does not have any data on the remaining mine tonnings from former uranium mines in Bulgaria. So not to pick too much on Bulgaria. As I said, they have submitted one of the most complete reports from the member states. All of the member states have a list of issues such as this to speak about with the Commission, and Euromines is assisting with that. So we're involved in a study that the Commission has launched. We're in a consortium together with the usual consultants and some experts in mining, and we're going to try to give a more clear, complete picture to the EU and explain to them the diversity of our sector, the diversity of the wastes that are generated, and why some of these statistics look the way they do. So, for example, you can see in the top left, we're really going to try to map out, at least for the main metal mines, what is extracted, what goes to processing, what goes to a tailings dam or a waste rock pile, and what might be going to some kind of reuse or selling as a byproduct. We'll try to map that out for each of the metal mines. You see I have a list there of the metal mines we've identified in Bulgaria. And on the right you see we have a kind of a family tree or taxonomy of the different branches of the mining sector. And this was somewhat imposed upon us by the Commission, and you may already recognize that there's some misunderstandings there in that family tree. For example, you have a branch called construction minerals sitting side by side with another branch called aggregates. And we've had to point out to the Commission, well, mostly we think of those things as being one and the same. So I will be meeting with your ministry later this week, and we hope to establish a closer relationship, of course, with the assistance of the Chamber here nationally, and we will begin a conversation in the next 12 or 18 months to try to explain to the European Commission the story behind some of these figures. But more generally, the Euromines' position on the Extractive Waste Directive is that it's true that it covers a wide range of facilities and sites. The vast majority of them will be of very low risk to people or the environment, but then a significant number of them will be of very high risk in terms of the mitigation measures that are required. This is perhaps some challenge to the proposal from the previous speaker about regional or supranational mining codes. They will inevitably cover a wide range of circumstances. Our directive, as well, being in Europe, to some extent, may cover many thousands of historic mining facilities. And we know that in Bulgaria, we've had mining activity at least back to Roman times, if not before. So this is something that also adds a little bit of confusion, I think, for the European Commission in understanding the difference between a legacy site and an operating site, how those things are administered or managed. But what we like about the directive is that the directive applies a proportionate approach, and this is enshrined in the Treaty of the EU. All of our law should be proportionate in nature, and the directive has a sliding scale of provisions that apply more and more as the consequences of the failure of an extractive waste facility increase. So we would expect that a Category A facility from a large metal mine, perhaps containing sulfide minerals, would attract the most strict requirements from our directive, but we would also expect that a family-run gravel quarry with very little environmental sensitivity might even attract none. All in all, accurate reporting by our regulators is needed to ensure that implementation of this proportionate approach continues. And we ask for nothing more and nothing less. And I think that's it. Thank you, Milan.
Johannes, thank you very much. It's always very important to have Euromines attend conferences like this and to make your contribution as the key voice in Brussels of the whole European industry, mining industry. Now it is my pleasure to call to the floor Mr. Bojan Rashev, a top expert in sustainable development with a lot of experience in Bulgaria, working for Denstrat Bulgaria as a managing partner. So please take the floor.
Thank you. I can't stand here, so I'll talk walking a little bit. My name is Bojan Rašev. I'm a managing partner of Denstrat Bulgaria. Thank you for the introduction as a top sustainability expert in Bulgaria. It might be so. My presentation will be in the name of Asarel Medet, which is one of the leading copper mining companies in Bulgaria, as you can see on the picture, because I work a lot with them and I work a lot on the specific topic that I'll be talking about. But before that, I was first asked actually to talk about permitting. And I'll use the floor to make a very short presentation on permitting. It's 10 seconds. If somebody of you represents the Bulgarian government by any means, can you raise your hand, please? So look around. We have one person. I'm amazed. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So, permitting will be difficult. Okay? That's it. But I'll go into a more difficult topic, much more difficult than permitting because, you know, and it's not a coincidence that everybody talks about social license to operate. Just to show you the latest UI report on top 10 business risks facing mining and metals. And if you look at the number one business risk for 2019-2020, it's license to operate. It jumps up from the position 7 from the last year. It has always been among the top 10 in the last 10 years. Ever since I work in this business, license to operate, stakeholders, issues, has always been there, yeah? So, it's in Bulgaria as well, very important one. A little bit background on what is the meaning of mining in Bulgaria, because you saw the numbers from the very beginning, but I'll show you a little bit broader picture. This is the latest report coming out of the Bulgarian National Statistics Institute on the growth change since 2007 to 2017 in percentage in the different districts in Bulgaria. And you can see that the Stara Zagora district is the one that has 132% of growth of GDP in the last 10 years. And the other one that is growing really a lot is the Sofia Oblast district. That's the region around Sofia, not the city of Sofia itself. These two regions, so these are the fastest developing in terms of economic development regions in Bulgaria. They depend on mining completely, practically, for the businesses that actually lie in the hearts of their economies. The first one is the lignite mining that is firing the Bulgarian energy system practically. And the second one is the Arubis metallurgical plant that is fed by the two big copper mining companies in Bulgaria, Eurasian and Asarel Medet. And also, of course, by concentrates coming from abroad. These two regions are the regions where if you don't live in a big city in Bulgaria, yeah, if you live somewhere in the province, you want to have this type of industry somewhere around. Otherwise, you are poor. That's it. That's the reality of economic development in Bulgaria. So it's industry or energy based on local mining. So what does it mean for us? So imagine you are a mining company, you have a great offer. You go to a place, you say, I come here with my 100 million euro of investment to develop the project. You know, I will employ 500 people for 20 years, and so on and so on. Yeah? You have a great offer. Nobody can refuse. True or false? I mean, from a rational point of view, obviously you are right. But we live in a very irrational world, and it's getting even worse. So, what is actually happening? When I want to know what people think about something, not the people in this room, but the people outside, yeah? I always Google. and I check what the Google images will show me, okay? So you go, you say, you know, I want you to be miners in my mine. There is what people think, you know. You offer them to work this, you know, write miners in Google, that is what you get, okay? So, mining environment, that is what they imagine. It's not fake, that's what comes out of Google. You can try it. Now, other people come to them and they tell them, you know, you could have organic agriculture. It's much better than mining. It looks better. You could have ecotourism. It looks much better than mining. Is it true? It's obviously true. So, that's it. That's in people's minds. That's the comparison that they make. And the decision in 99.5% of the cases is, I want to live green, I want to be healthy, I don't want to be so rich. That's what they, you know, think. Or they don't really think it, but they state it. Okay? So if you still believe that people cannot refuse your offer, you're wrong. We really need to know how to bridge the gap between these pictures and these pictures. Because these are the pictures from Panaguriște, for example, where Asarial Medet is practically the economic development of practically everything. So you see the hospitals, the hotels, the mine doesn't really look so bad, and stuff like this. So the big question is, how do we bring this message? Yeah? Because people usually think sustainability is not mining, mining is not sustainability. It's possible to do it. I'll share very shortly our experience with one specific project, a project done for Asarial Medet. In Bulgaria, in the last 40 years, we have one open new greenfield mining project that has just completed construction, and it's already practically working a little bit, the Krumovgrad gold mine. And there is a second project, the Breznik gold mine, that is under construction. It has all the permits and stuff. Both projects took lots of time, yeah? And I'll share just very shortly how we were able to, you know, change the public attitude in Breznik. In this case, it was a project that we developed together with Asarial for Asarial. The first big mistake that actually Asarial did in this case, when they acquired Trace Resources, the company that was exploring the site, for 1 year, they didn't go there. Yeah, they didn't go, they didn't appear, they didn't say anything. And in this 1 year, everything changed. You know, the whole positive attitude towards a potential mining project turned into a complete disaster with, you know, signatures against them and strikes and everything. Because if you don't talk about yourself, your enemies will talk about you, and they will not say anything good about you. And then people, they listen to somebody. Yeah? They listen to those who talk. If you are silent, they don't know that you offer them something good. Anyway, so when we went there, I remember the first ever meeting. That's the only thing that I'll share. The first ever meeting, we were invited, me and my wife, Clementina, she's my business partner. We went there, we were invited by the municipal administration into the basement. The people from the municipal administration, they invited us in the basement to talk with us. They didn't want anybody from the town to see them that they were talking to us. We were not from the company, we were external consultants, but anyway, they didn't offer us water. They spent 5 hours with us in this basement, no windows, no air. We spent 2 hours listening how bad we are and how many lies we will tell them and how manipulative everything is. and how bad the world is towards these people there, and so on and so on. You have to survive these 2 hours. You have to survive. And then in the next 2 hours, they started actually listening to what we were talking. But this was the meeting when we were able to make them start to listen. Okay, that was the beginning of the process. And then within 3 months, we reached a point when we had 600 people in the public hearing of the environmental impact assessment hearing, out of town of 3,000 people. So everybody who was actually interested in this was there, and the public was extremely supportive. Within 3 months, we were able to completely turn the mood. But that's a very long process, actually, and it's a process. You know, stakeholder engagement is a process. It's not a one event. You don't expect that you go there, you make one meeting, you persuade them, and they are there. Not possible. Yeah? You get the slides. I will not go into the details. Actually, people don't hate. They don't hate us when we go there. They simply don't know whom to believe. You know, they are in communist countries. People are accustomed to being lied by the government, by every businessman, and so on. So they are very. They don't easily believe anybody. So you really have to spend time there with them, to drink lots of like rakia and stuff like this, spend time, discuss family matters, discuss any other thing except for mining and the project. And once you are accepted as a trusted friend, then you can start talking about the project. I passionately believe that there is a case for rational sustainability in this world, and that the deep green movement that is sweeping Western Europe currently will have an end. And because these people, they grow, millennials, when they are teenagers, they ride a bike. When they have a kid, they want to buy a Volvo. That's it. That's life. I've been through it. All of us have been through it. Yeah? The last one. This attitude, people believe that their opinion doesn't really matter. So they believe that they consider themselves kind of insignificant, ignorant, illiterate. They don't have self-assessment of themselves. You have to give them something like this by listening to them and starting to really try to address their needs, not your project, their needs. So there are three P's here: patience, persistence, and personal ties. I actually mentioned this several times, but that's probably the most important message. And again, it's a very long process. Every single mining client has come to us after they faced a catastrophe. They never come to us before, starting to work and try to prepare, try to be ready for something like this and prepare a strategy in advance and stuff like this. No. They come to us when they hit the wall, yeah? And when they think, okay, I have no other choice but to pay this bloody expensive consultant somehow. Yeah? And then, of course, it's very difficult already. So my final message is, as you noticed, everybody knows this. Everybody who has a little bit of rational thinking knows that the green economy, not only the green economy, any economy is not possible without mining. So we cannot stop. It's our responsibility to be able to win the hearts of these people. Yeah? Otherwise, we go empty-handed, they go empty-handed, nobody is happy. And yeah, I don't want to finish like this, so keep working. Thank you.
And this was real life experience. And I like those kinds of presentations which are juicy and full of life and reality and experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will be the last speaker at this panel, and I will talk about mining development and mining law in Serbia. So I will start with, where is this? Yes, I will start with an assessment of investors about the mining environment in Serbia. And that assessment is actually pretty positive in the sense that first, Serbia is endowed by good, abundant mineral resources, that the infrastructure of energy, experienced labor force is good, that there is a lot of service providers which can locally provide good services to the mining industry at competitive prices. There is a general impression that the government is supportive of mining, and of course there are fluctuations, but generally we see a supportive government. Then there is a lot of praise actually for the mineral law, for the mining law of 2015, that it has significantly improved the situation, and that it is like one of the best laws, they say, in Europe. I think there is still a lot of space for improvement. And that we typically do not have a problem with the social license to operate. We didn't have protests against exploration projects and mining projects, only one in 2006, 2007, and that was not significant. Nobody else had problems of social license to operate, because Serbia really has a lot of historical experience with mining from the 15th century onwards, and massively in the 20th century. And all this has really developed into a lot of mining, into a lot of exploration and mining activities and transactions in the last 2-3 years. So we have actually Zijin Mining, who bought RTB Bor and bought Neptune because of the Timok project in Serbia, which is the huge copper discovery owned by Freeport. Then there is, of course, Mundoro, there is Dundee, there is Freeport, there is Eurolithium, and a number of other companies which are doing very hard work and committing significant resources into Serbia and working closely with the Serbian government. Talking about mining legislation, this is my specialism, and generally reforming legislation. And as Mr. Barnes said, we need an entrepreneurial government. You need an entrepreneurial government. And you need a window of opportunity. You have a situation that within the same minister term of office and the same government, you have changes in mood. And you must take advantage of a period of time when they are favorable for a change of the law. We had, for example, a very bad mood in 2012, 2013. Then we had good mood in 2014 to maybe 2016. Now it's a bit worse. And those things change. So it's very important to be politically sensitive and to understand what is the good moment to appeal for change. On the other hand, asking for change at a moment when the mood is not right, you can actually have an adverse effect. You can get the situation, the mining law or the subordinate legislations to be deteriorated if you don't choose the right timing. Also, you have to understand the mentality of a minister. I used to be a minister, so I know the differences. My aim was to improve significantly the areas in which I deal, because I'm not a professional politician. I was not interested in remaining in politics. So I could push important fundamental reforms. Other ministers, and that means the majority of them, are professional politicians. And they want to remain in office for a good period of time. They're not ready to go into significant changes. because they are walking on the iron rod. And they have to survive. So they will accept changes which will make them look good, but they will not accept changes which will endanger them with the key stakeholders. So in 2015, when we had a window of opportunity to change the law, we did it actually in 2 stages. The Geological and Mining Association of Serbia, I'm the general counsel of it, was asked by the minister to draft a full new law, a full new mining law. So then I asked for assistance from an international mining lawyer, and I got my dear friend to work with me, Mr. Hubert Andre Dumont. So we worked for a good 2 months, 2.5 months, and that was a shockingly intense period on drafting a full new law, which we did on 100 pages of new law. The problem was that the Minister of Mining was not of my mentality, but of a professional politician mentality. So he understood. We came out of the session and he said, "This is revolutionary." And I said, well, maybe, you know, and that moment I understood that they won't take it. So they rejected this very good draft, actually, which could be easily adopted in Sweden or Finland as a top law in Europe. They have rejected it because some of the stakeholders were losing some of their state income. And it was simply too much of a leap, too much of a change, too much rationality, too little good old communism, which we come from, and so forth. So then we understood that won't follow through, but we needed to change the law to give security of tenure. And what we did was actually to reduce our interventions on the government to, for example, 10, 12 key provisions which need to be changed to give security of tenure through the course of time. And we did it, and I negotiated personally with the minister and his team, and he accepted 10 out of 12 of the amendments. And what did we want to achieve? Clarity and predictability of the legal framework, clarity and predictability. Those are the 2 key words. The law must be clear and must be predictable. In order to have predictability, you must have transparency and non-discretional procedures. So what we did was to have clear definitions of the rights and obligations, exclusivity of exploration and mining rights, sufficient to extend time for exploration, automatic conversion from exploration to mining, and to try to also grant ancillary rights necessary for the support of mining. I was comparing actually the Bulgarian mining code and the Serbian mining code, and I see many things in common. Many things in common. It's obvious that the 2 systems are coming from the same communist background, that they have made significant moves forward, significant moves, both the Bulgarian and the Serbian law, and there are many things in common which can be seen, and I think that both laws are in the forefront of the European mining laws. I think both countries actually did pretty well. Of course, there is space to improve. And here I see potential for improvement. When you do mining, you need access to land. Why wouldn't that access to land be automatically given when a permit is issued? An exploration, well, not necessarily an exploration permit, but for a mining permit, access to land should not be blocked by the willingness or unwillingness of the owners of land. For this reason, we have introduced in Serbia in the 2015 revision of the law, expropriation for private mining purposes, which is quite unique. So it's not expropriation for state companies, but for private companies, because mining is in the public interest, and therefore I don't see a reason why expropriation should not be used as a vehicle for taking land. Now, I understand this is very unpopular with companies. This doesn't. This is in violation of the best standards in mining because of license to operate, but still there is a Damocles sword above the heads of the owners of land that in the worst case, if you have 2 or 3 holdouts, you can press them with expropriation. Ancillary permitting should be as much as possible, as Hubert said, as much as possible it should be somehow included into the mining law. And once when you get a mining permit, the other aspects like environmental, water, energy, property rights, spatial planning, and so forth should follow suit. It should follow suit. Then there is the need to transfer and possibly pledge the right which you get. And the question is it a property right? What kind of right is it? Of course, it's issued as a decision of the government. It's an administrative decision, but the essence of it is it's a property right. And I read in some historic books that in France, for example, exploitation was considered as usus fructus of a specific kind, like 100 years ago approximately, which is not completely right, but I found it as an interesting thought. So it's a question to define, both in Bulgarian and Serbian law, is it a property right actually what you get? Is it some kind of a long-term lease in legal nature? Stability is the key question. In Bulgaria, you have a contract with the state. Once when you get a concession, you sign a contract with the state. There is this discussion, and in Europe it's highly unpopular to talk about investment agreements, which give long-term fiscal stability and long-term legal stability. Fiscal stability and legal stability. It's unpopular, like Europe is democratic, and you cannot bind the following government. And, you know, those are stable democracies. The mining fees are not changing. The tax systems are stable. So you don't need, and it's undemocratic to go into an investment agreement. On the other hand, I see a very good case, even in Europe, in the most stable countries, to go into investment agreements with the government, which would include the stability clauses regarding fiscal and key legal provisions. In that sense, I think that it's good that Bulgaria has the contracts on top of the concession which is granted by the Ministry and the Council of Ministers. It's a question, I advocate stability agreements for mining companies in Serbia, and probably I would also advocate the same in Bulgaria, that stability clauses are added into those agreements, because they really are needed for, you know, if you have in Bulgaria 35 years of a mining operating license, and the additional 15 years, many things change in 35 years. And we know it from the 20th century. Of course, foreign exchange freedom. Another interesting thing which could be added as a finesse is a force majeure clause in a mining law, which would mean actually when you have a drastic reduction of prices, when it becomes untenable, unfeasible economically to run a mine, that the mine gets not permanently but temporarily out of operation, and then when the prices come back, that you continue operations, so that this force majeure clause on very restricted grounds would give some additional security of tenure to the mining companies. And of course, for all foreign investors, it's critical that the bilateral investment treaties that are signed between the countries have the international arbitration mechanism, so that the foreign investor can sue the state in case it violates its own laws against the interests of the investors and eventually its own people, basically. So this is the mining law as it looks in Serbia. And again, it reminds in many ways to the Bulgarian law, in the sense that we also have the certificate of resources, basically a state proof that you have found something. And you have that same mechanism in Bulgaria, and as Hubert says, it comes from communism. Actually, when the state was, and actually not even the state, the Communist Party was allocating the money. So now of course, you have the banks which are giving the money, and they're probably much more professional in using professional advisors than was the state, whether you really have a project or not when they're giving their own money. So typically after exploration, you get the certificate of resources, then you get an exploitation field permit, and then you get a mine building permit. And then you build a mine, and then you get a commissioning permit, a use permit. The terms of exploration have been expanded, and I'll show you now. So what did we actually achieve in 2015? As I told you, we have introduced expropriation also for the private interests. We have introduced an extension, okay, this is unimportant, an extended exploration terms, up to 10 years for exploration and 2 years of reservation on top of that, which is significantly better. It used to be 7 years before. Critically, we have introduced the right to obtain a mining permit. Both the exploitation field permit and the mine construction permit. So security of tenure, which we did not have, was finally introduced by those interventions that we made with the ministry. My law firm is specialized in mining. We give government advice and we give commercial law advice in all aspects of mining and all ancillary permits. We really find solutions. We work closely with the client and the government on a very legal and clean, in a very legal and clean way to secure that the permitting is duly issued to the client, that all legal needs are served very well, and that everything goes according to the plan set by the client. These are some of the clients which we had, and I want to thank you very much, and to thank the speakers at this, I hope, very interesting panel, and also I think to invite you to a pause and maybe a lunch. Thank you very much.